I'm Susan Loewenberg, producing director of LA Theater Works. How do you make a funny, insightful, and moving story out of the invention of the pap smear? Let's find out. We're joined by Dickey, the author of Nan and the Lower Body, along with other critically acclaimed plays like The Convent, The Rembrandt, The Amish Project, and Charles Ives' Take Me Home. Dickey, welcome to LA Theater Works.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Let's start at the beginning. What inspired you to write Nan in the Lower Body?
Oh, so the impulse to write this play was a very personal one. My grandparents lived with my family my entire childhood, and a very formative aspect of their presence in our home was inevitably their disabilities and their aging and their deterioration. So my grandfather had cancer and Parkinson's, and he broke his hip a few times. And my grandmother, who we called Nan, had multiple sclerosis. And one day after my grandmother's death, my uncle, my mom's brother, who has actually now passed, he told me that he believed Nan worked with Dr. Papanicolaou, the man who created the pap smear. And I realized that, one, I didn't know a lot about my grandmother's professional life, despite how long of a tenure that I had to ask those kinds of questions of her. I really didn't. And it was kind of this stunning moment of realizing that despite being very close with these people in my family, my grandparents, like I ate dinner with them every night at our family table, I was left with this sense that perhaps I had failed to really know them. And so in hindsight, it's like the play was sort of built on this level of wondering, like, what if that was true? What if Nan worked with Dr. Papanicolaou? And so the play was a chance to sort of dream that possibility into existence. And then in the meantime, I have to say and confess that I was struck with horror that I really didn't understand what a pap smear actually was, which was very pathetic because I had been getting a pap smear every year since I was 15. Nor did I know anything about the very interesting and brave person who had pioneered this technique that completely revolutionized women's health. And so it's almost like I began to realize that the play had this opportunity to fill in two kinds of knowing and longing. On the one hand, a personal call to know my grandmother finally after all these years. And then a kind of larger global medical call to know and understand the revolution in women's health that was the creation of the pap smear and the man who created it.
So what was your grandmother like?
She was really smart. She was very perceptive and patient. Oh my God, Susan, she was profoundly patient. And she had this very particular kind of wicked, dry wit. She had a way of laughing it was almost like this combination. I have very clear memories of this from my childhood. It was almost like this combination of air squeezing through her lungs, and then she would kind of go up 3 octaves in pitch. It could be, actually, if I'm honest, it could be a little frightening as a child because you could kind of hear, like her lungs and her organs and air and her windpipe, which was frail from a goiter. But you knew she was laughing, but you were also a little frightened while it then turned into this kind of keening where she couldn't stop crying because she was laughing so hard. Actually, my sister is the only person that can make me laugh like that. My grandmother was very joyful and her laugh was totally her own. But also, I think to this day, I think there are many aspects of her that are still secret to me and that I didn't know.
So she never talked about her work with Dr. Pap?
No. So I know that my grandmother was a cytologist and pathologist, but I never had the wherewithal, and it's really a profound regret that the play is, of course, sprung from, that I didn't ask those questions. So of course, in the process of the play is commissioned by the Sloan Foundation through the Manhattan Theater Club, and I was very candid with them of like, I don't have confirmation that this is true. And I, did my little tippy-tappy-typey on the World Wide Web to really excavate if this was a fact. And I was not able to confirm or deny, right, whether or not Nan actually worked with Dr. Papanicolaou. And so it's it's almost like the play became this opportunity to sort of, it became a fantasia, right? Like an opportunity to dream that possibility and let myself sort of regard my grandmother as this full, talented, hopeful, ambitious, complex human being that maybe in my childhood, naivete and ignorance and fear and self-centeredness, and I didn't have the wherewithal to look beyond my own lens and ask her more about her life.
At what moment in time did all of this lived experience and the questions you never asked begin to percolate in your consciousness and make you suddenly interested in exploring this possibility of the relationship between the pap smear and your grandmother?
Oh, this answer is probably going to be so unsatisfying, but this is somehow, I consider this part of like the mystery of writing. It's like sometimes you're like, where's this coming from? And it ends up being like the medicine that your life is ready for. And I think of this play and its impulse as kind of in that category. So on a very practical level, it was a wonderful point in my playwriting career. And, Manhattan Theater Club and I had cultivated a great relationship. I, of course, knew them as an actor, and they'd been fans of my writing and following me. And we reached out and connected about possibly me submitting a Sloan commission, a Sloan play application. And this was kind of what was circling the drain of my brain. And so, I started looking into like Dr. Papanicolaou and of course the pap smear, and immediately was like horrified by my own ignorance. And so, the part of the process of writing the play was really some rigorous research, because of course that's extremely important to the Sloan Foundation, which has a mission that I love of letting theater marry science for the benefit of us all learning more through the human lens of a human story on stage. I just love it. I always have research kind of in my writing process in general. To learn more, I sort of started talking to my gynecologist, whom I adored in New York. I had a wonderful doctor. And she introduced me to some friends at Sloan Kettering. I spent the day there in the cytology pathology ward. There was this wonderful woman at Sloan Kettering named Dr. Marcia Edelweiss. She sat with me in her office and talked through the basics of the procedure of a pap smear. They showed me the staining process. And also while we were in her office, she had a microscope in there, of course, and she put a slide of vaginal smear in the stage of the microscope so that I could see what a cytologist like my grandmother would have been looking for. And of course, I really wanted the science to hold up in the play. And I felt that in that process of educating myself about the procedure, the play had an opportunity to also offer that education to the audience and others. And here we are.
What did your research tell you about the real Dr. Pap? I mean, was he, for example, as warm and as funny as you portrayed him?
I do love my character of Dr. Pap. I love that you said warm and funny, because I think of him the same way. It's like, so to answer your question very directly, Susan, I have no idea if I can speak fully to the real Dr. Pap, but for me, as I learned more about him, and of course learned more about the pap smear and how he willed that into being and revolutionized women's health, to me that is a testament of who he is and what he did. It's the adversity that he overcame to do it. He was Greek, he was poor, he was brilliant and clever, and he cared about something that many people did not care about, which was women's health. And I just can't help but think he must have been made of very particularly hardy stuff to push that cart up that cultural medical hill. And of course, the world, and particularly women, but all of us with sisters and mothers and daughters, owes him this huge debt. But I liked thinking that, of course, he must have been, it's a subject that makes people uncomfortable, right? The vagina and the cervix and the ovaries and the fallopian tubes and the reproductive system. And so he must have been very clever in terms of finding a way to let that discomfort be there and yet move people through it in a way that made them trust him and gave him the money to keep doing his urgent work, that we now can see the benefit of so many decades later.
So in the play, Nan, of course, goes off. she leaves him and she goes off to pursue her career. What did your grandmother do in terms of her own career? Do you have any idea?
I do. My grandmother did end up working in the cytology pathology ward of MGH. You know, that as her MS, which at the time did not have a name yet, as that really started to become a huge central, unfortunately destructive force in her life, she was such a good cytologist that MGH, Mass General Hospital, set up a lab in her home because she was no longer able to commute to the hospital and work there. So they set up a lab in her home, and they would send a little wooden crate. This was all told to me by my Uncle Mark, of slides of vaginal smear for her to analyze that day of patients. And he remembers, because that's how valuable her eye for catching those cancerous and precancerous and dysplastic cells in the slides was. She was really good at it. So my uncle tells this story that he came home from school and he remembers finding her at the dining room table with the microscope, weeping over a slide, because it is a sample from a young mother with 4 children who has stage 4 cancer. And at that time, of course, the pap smear changed this. And that suddenly early detection was possible. But for many women, the cancer had spread too far and it was too late. And thanks to Dr. Papanikolaou, that has changed now, that we catch these cancers in time to treat them. So she did go on to have quite a career as a lab worker and as a cytologist pathologist.
Reproductive rights and the role of women in science are key issues in the play. What do you think your grandmother's or Nan's life and career would have been like if she'd come of age in the 2020s?
Well, of course, I imagine that immediately she would have had access to a different level of medical technology and care in managing her and understanding her MS, because we've come a long way on that disease and treatment to manage it and make life, to be able to live a full life with MS. I would like to think she wouldn't have been so isolated as a woman in the medical field of cytology and pathology. And, you know, I can't help but suspect that maybe her eldest granddaughter would have had more robust courage, because I think maybe we train our younger people better now in some of these things to ask some of those harder questions that probably hid in my little heart, questions like, when did you know that your ability to have a career and use your intelligence for your work was going to be severely limited by your disease? What were some of your rituals to comfort yourself during these hard years of not knowing what was wrong? How did you manage your anger and fear during that time? What do you look back on and wish you had done differently? What advice would you pass on to me, your granddaughter, who's ambitious and intelligent? If I had the presence of mind to ask, things like that kind of come to mind, that maybe if Nan had a different shot at a different time, some of these stories could have turned out differently.
But what's interesting is she passed it on to you because you're you. I think that her life inspired you perhaps in ways that you didn't realize at the time. When I look at you and I look at what you've achieved, and I hear the story of your grandmother, it's all of a piece.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Some things are transmitted without our realizing it at the time.
I'm so touched by what you said. Thank you so much. This is going to sound so weird, but like, if writers haven't told you, I'm going to tell you officially. Like, writers are really weird. And I wrote a letter to Nan, like the Nan in my heart, right? Being like, is there, like, I want to make sure, that I do you justice, not just as who I knew you as, but also more than I knew you as. And is there anything like you want to tell me?
So, what do you want listeners to take away from Nan in the Lower Body?
I suppose first and foremost, a reverence and a gratitude for the scientists who devote their lives to developing these medical advancements that really do literally save our lives. And I love thinking that perhaps the play invites people to consider their present moment with their loved ones as an opportunity to hear their truths and their lives and their wisdom before it's too late and they're gone.
That's a beautiful way to end this interview. Thank you so much, Jessie Dickey. Really, it was a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you to LA Theatre Works very much.